Joe, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me, Colin. It's a pleasure
And we
to
were
be here.
joking that you're all podcasted out, but I'm glad that we've managed to get this one in the diary because it's been a mad month and a half for you.
It has, but I suspect your audience is not going to know who on earth I am, unless they are in a particular corner of the podcasting world, which is related to
Yeah, that's
Bitcoin.
true. Although I will say that I was sent your video by double figures of listeners to say, have you seen this? A mixture of LinkedIn and
Wow.
Instagram DMs just saying, have you seen this? Because I have spoken about crypto on the podcast previously, 5 or 6 episodes with the guys from Crypto Glasgow about investing in crypto and profit taking and all these different concepts around the investment side of things. And our first ever episode was about why Bitcoin and its use case that we did together back in 2020. But so much has changed since then. And many of the listeners that have come and joined the show over that 4 or 5 year period have maybe not heard those types of episodes. And I also would say that what your video did, what's the problem, is it brought that conversation to everyone, regardless of what their knowledge of the financial system or the monetary system was at that point in time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, firstly, I'm amazed that 10 or more of your listeners it sent you the video, because that's just. I mean, I had an idea it was getting out to reach different people, but those sorts of numbers are wonderful, because as you say, like the video is aimed at just being accessible for absolutely everybody. And so whether you're a child or you're a pensioner who's a total technophobe, or somebody in between, you can sit down and watch this video, and then within, I mean, the video's 39 minutes, but when you take out a couple of minutes at either end, it's like 35 minutes. You understand where all the problems are that we see today, where they're coming from, and they have a definite cause, and that definite cause is the quality of the money. And so we have this huge problem which underlies all the other problems, and all the other problems lie downstream of this single issue, which the vast majority of people have a sense that there's something, but they don't know what it is, and this allows them to connect cause and effect, and then also provides hope for the future, because we also have the solution.
I think that's a really important part.
We have the solutions. People don't necessarily understand where to put that solution in their mental framework. It's something that doesn't do anything unless you understand what the problem is. And once you understand the problem, it's very clear what this thing does, and it solves the problem, right? And so this video, I'm just so glad it's getting out there and being viewed by people outside of the Bitcoin
I'm a big
ecosystem.
believer that when double figures or even high single figures of people send something to me, that the thousands in my audience are going to be interested in it, because those are just the people that were moved to take action. And you know yourself from, for example, I think the video's on like 120, 130,000 views on YouTube. There's something like, I don't know, 7,000 people who have liked it. But I bet if you asked of the hundreds of thousands of people that have watched it, did they like it? They would have said yes, but they just haven't maneuvered themselves to hit the like button. In the same way, like I've got, I don't know,
Yeah,
565-star reviews on Spotify, which is great for a show of my size, but there's 10x that who are listening all the time that probably like it, but just haven't taken the time to
yeah.
review it. It's just it's a matter of multiples and people involved that are willing to take action. Have you ever rubbed beef fat on your face? Sounds crazy, but that's what I've been doing since January with No Tox face balm. I've been really focused in the last few years on reducing the number of toxins that I take into my body, whether that's getting a filter for the water in my tap, whether that's removing things like heating plastics or drinking from plastic bottles. The skin is the biggest organ in the body, so it was about time I considered what it was I was rubbing on my skin, and that includes things like moisturizers and other potentially harmful chemicals. Since January, I've been using No Tox face balm. My skin looks and feels the best it's ever felt, and you can benefit from that too. The link will be in the show notes for notoxskincare.co, and you can use Cambro for 15% off.
Yeah, it's you've got a big enough sample size there that there's something in the video which has piqued people's interests. And again, thank you for having me on here and enabling me to talk with you and then share this information with your audience, because the podcast I've mainly done up to this point, with the exception of one, have been within the Bitcoin ecosystem, and they are the natural audience for this to start with, because it's the thing they can send to their friends. We often have, as a group, a struggle communicating with people who haven't had the penny drop as far as Bitcoin goes, about why it's relevant for people, why they should care. And some of that is down to sort of the personality types that typically get attracted to Bitcoin, because it is very structured and logical. And if you're from an engineering background or mathematical background, or privacy focused, or libertarian, you naturally come across these things sooner than if you don't tick a number of those buckets. And then communicating back with people who don't share that same background or that same starting point becomes challenging. And I think what this video is it's becoming that thing that Bitcoiners send to their friends, right? It's like, watch this, and within half an hour you'll understand why I'm so passionate about this thing, and why it's never going away, and why it is the solution to everything. And I think it really just helps people get to the starting line. It's like, once you understand the problem, now we can talk about the solution. Because talking about solution with no mental framework of the problem is never going to go anywhere, unless you're in it for the technology or the libertarian aspects. Also,
that's right. And what interested me about your making of this video and what's the impact it's gone on to have is that originally it was designed for a presentation to a group of friends or friends of friends. Talk us through that process.
So I've never created anything before, to share in public. It's always been, my background was, physics. I went to Goldman Sachs, did 10 years as an equity derivatives trader, and then started my own business with writing algorithms for modeling sports, and then engineering and these sorts of things. So we scaled that and we sold it, and then grew another business. But over that period of time, like I found Bitcoin in 2020, and much like everybody else, I dismissed it multiple times before. Oh, it's a Ponzi scheme. It's this, it's that. It's because you come at it being told everything is wrong about it from the media, and misconceptions, all of these things. And when I was invited by a friend to go to this weekend away, like he'd invited 15 of his friends from around the world. I'd never met any of them. He's like, I'll pull people from different parts of my life who have entrepreneurial backgrounds, and we'll go away and we'll just have a weekend in this like random hotel in Portugal, and everyone will bring something to talk about, and it will just be a great weekend because there'll be lots of like-minded people, and we'll all learn something. So I wanted to talk about Bitcoin, but I never met anyone going, because I had no idea about how I should be pitching, what I should be pitching, and therefore how I should be pitching it to all these other people, just to try and talk about it. And I had half an hour. So for the very first time, you're forced to like articulate your thoughts and try and explain it to somebody else in a structured way. And the material I've ever created before was purely from a business perspective. So talking to people and doing presentations, but always like a means to an end, not for just like educating. And so instead of trying to explain what Bitcoin is, I said, well, I'm not going to be able to do that in half an hour to a degree that I'll be happy with. So if I just change the target to be, after half an hour, people will want to learn about Bitcoin, that is a much more accessible target, and also means I can then create something that doesn't assume anything of anybody. So whoever is there, I can get them to the starting line to be motivated to learn about Bitcoin. It's then on them whether they want to learn about it or not. But at least I've taken them to the starting line. And so, I then titled it, "What's the Problem?" Because without understanding the problem, you don't appreciate any solution. It's the same for absolutely everything in life. And, it went down, it surpassed all my expectations. And then they encouraged me to share it with other people. which is why I then went away and made this video and then published it to nobody on YouTube and on X. And yeah, I mean, the YouTube, I'm just constantly amazed by the YouTube views of this, but YouTube's not the main place for it. I launched it on X. I had about 500 followers, and most of them were bots, I would imagine, because within Bitcoin, Colin, a lot of people are happy just sitting in the background, and so I was always a consumer of content, but not a contributor. But when I put this video out, I put it as an embedded video on X and just put the YouTube link below. And,
Caught fire from there.
I shared it with a few people before, and it just went and went and went, and yeah, launched it on the Tuesday, and then every day it was getting shared by bigger and bigger people, and then on the Saturday, Michael Saylor, who a lot of your audience won't know, but I believe he's the chairman now of what was MicroStrategy is now Strategy. They rebranded in the last week or so, but the sort of the leading Bitcoin company in the world, in the US, and the best performing stock in the US last year. He downloaded the video and then reposted it as a native embed himself and just wrote "What's the problem?" to 4 million people, and it was just amazing. Like, it's the reach has far surpassed my expectations, and now it's reaching into areas outside of Bitcoin. So the Bitcoiners are sharing it, and their friends are sharing it, and their friends are sharing it, and it's it gives me great opportunities to come and talk to the likes of you. So I really would love your audience, if they've not seen it, to watch it after this. But hopefully we can talk a little bit more about some of the issues it raises and help people get a
Chief
better sense for it.
amongst those, and one of the terms that you use within this description on the YouTube channel is, this is for someone trying to make a sense of why the world feels increasingly off balance. And I'm trying not to be guilty of this in my content, but some of the clips from recent podcasts I've done and episodes where I've been a bit fired up have been talking about the state of the UK. And those are often the clips that are doing the best. And those are the episodes where I'm getting the most messages from people saying like, what is going on here? How can nobody else articulate these things? And I feel it's important as somebody in my demographic to speak about why we're maybe feeling so off. And some of that is policy related, but you name some problems at the very start of your video that are really like a wide range of problems, Joe. They're not like necessarily like, oh, inflation. It's a case of declining birth rates, forever wars, mental health crisis, obesity problem, cost of living, swollen and potentially corrupt government. These are all things that more and more of us are becoming aware of, and it feels like there's more coming onto our shoulders and pressing down on us than ever before. And I think at the very start of your video, when I saw that, I was just nodding along straight away. I was like, these are all problems that I am noticing and feeling. And I think more of us are becoming aware of than before because it's actually getting harder to ignore.
Yeah. Yeah. And I could have written twice as many problems down easily. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find anybody in the UK right now that thought we were going in a good direction, that thought things were improving, because they're not. I mean, objectively, you look at pretty much everything; it's going in the wrong direction, and like we are on this slow decline, where and it is true of a lot of other countries as well, particularly of the UK right now, and that's a combination of the problem, but also the approach from government to accentuate the problem. But the core problem that underpins all of these is a single thing. But everybody thinks about them, say everybody, the vast majority of people think about them as being isolated things. So what does the obesity crisis have to do with the mental health crisis, have to do with the cost of living, has to do with, swollen government? Surely they're separate things. But no, they're absolutely not. They all share the same root. It's just the path from cause to effect is obscured. And it's obscured because A, it's complicated, and B, no one wants you to understand what the cause and effect is. But the video shows the cause is the corruption of the money. And money affects every aspect of our life, whether it's online, offline, business, family, personal. It's what drives everything. And the money is corrupted, and that corrupts our decision makings, and it corrupts us as individuals. I'm not saying explicitly, taking bribes or something like that, although obviously that does, but it corrupts the way that you think about the world, the way that you think about your life. And then that's where all of these second order issues, the third order issues begin
As you
to
say,
emanate from.
the problems
So,
are
yeah.
compartmentalized, but they shouldn't be. And also the causes are compartmentalized, or other things are blamed. So, for example, at this moment in time, there's lots of talk about, but if we just had a wealth tax, it's actually the big corporations not paying their fair share. It's immigration, or it's directives from this government or this body, or it's this particular segment of society that are causing these ills. And they are contributing factors, no doubt about it. But what you really clearly articulate is that, as you say, it's the quality and the pureness of the money that is creating these problems downstream from this initial root problem. And I think anyone that listens to a podcast like this one is interested in personal responsibility, self-development. What can you do? What can you control within your locus of control? And it's really dispiriting where there's macro factors at play that make you feel like your agency has been removed, Joe. And that's been a real challenge for me over the
Yeah,
last number of years when I see these things.
100%. And everybody feels that. Everybody feels like things are decaying around them, right? And it's impacting them. And a lot of people's energy and decision making now is focused on just trying to maintain what they have, maintain the position, rather than thinking about improvement. And I know, your podcast, you talk a lot about, self-improvement and all these different aspects. But that's taking a proactive approach to it. But even if you're not trying to self-improve, people are naturally fighting against the tide, just to maintain everything in their lives, right? And that's exhausting. That's exhausting. And it might be worth just talking a little bit about what we mean by the corruption of the money, and then how that flows downstream, because it probably sounds like an abstract connection for the people listening. But in effect, the video is the story of an island on a far off world, that people get shipwrecked on an island, and then they have to start again, and they decide what monetary system they're going to use. They decide to use perfect money, but there's a disagreement, and the two leaders emerge, and one wants to just lock in the characteristics of perfect money, because that, by definition, they're the characteristics of perfect money. And the other says, but what if we need to change anything? We should just have a big red button attached. We'll have perfect money, we'll have this big red button that we can press whenever we want and change any aspects. But of course, no one will ever press
It's
it.
only there
No
for
one will ever press it.
emergencies.
And then, emergencies only, and no one will ever press it. It's just in case. And of course, he ends up pressing it. And when he ends up pressing it, things get worse and worse and worse, until we end up with his society, Fiatello, which is just like today. And so people understand cause and effect. But there is an alternative, where you just don't have a big red button attached to the money, and the money is perfect. And it's beyond state control. And it's the state corruption of the money which is the core issue here. And I can quickly run you through how this may work. And so Fiatello, he presses the big red button to print a little bit of extra money for the government, because previously, with perfect money, is a fixed supply forever. And so the money becomes more valuable over time as society becomes more productive. And in that world, the costs go down and the quality goes up. So your money goes further next year than it does this year, because you're benefiting from the productivity increases of everybody in society. Everybody's working, improving their processes, becoming more efficient, they're also competing. And it's the free market. The free market drives down prices, and it leads naturally to higher quality, because the way people purchase, or their decision making around purchases of anything, is a combination of price and quality. So the highest quality at the lowest price wins, right? And it's somewhere on that balance, right? And you can maybe short term produce a product of lower quality at a lower price,
You
but
won't
you'll
have
get found
recurring
out
customers.
and you'll get outcompeted. Yeah, you'll get outcompeted, but this is the free market. So quality rises to the top at the lowest price, right? And so over time, prices fall for everybody and quality goes up, which is the total reverse of what we see in our lives. We see prices going up and quality going down. It's like, well, how did we end up here? That's just not the
It's
natural
not the
state of
natural
the
state,
world.
Joe. And
And
technology, by its very nature, as you've explained, should lead to prices coming down over time. And in today's society,
yeah,
with our inflationary fiat currency, there are times when technology advances so much that prices still manage to come down. For example, like compare what we paid for flat screen TVs 15, 20 years ago. Because the advances in technology have been
yes,
so quick and so good, it's come down. But there are many other things that we're looking at. So energy costs, um, food,
yeah,
for example. Technology is still advanced at a really impressive pace. In fact, if you showed somebody from the year 2000 what we have access to in 2025, they would be astounded at how fast things have gone. And I say that from somebody that was born in 1992, and I look at how different somebody's childhood is compared to my own. And I'm sure you see that within your own family, Joe. But
yeah,
the cost pressure through our monetary system has been such that we are seeing such rising costs. And as you say, it sounds like a complete fallacy that we could ever see lower prices for things as time goes on and our money being able to buy more, because the narrative of the past few years in particular has been, oh, I have less to spend this year than I had before. I have a cost of living crisis.
yes. But lower prices is the natural state of the world when you don't interfere with it. Because humans, the free market, the free market means that when you have perfect money, is that you're harnessing the productivity of everyone else in the world. Everybody is acting in their own self-interest for the benefit of everybody else. Right? Prices fall because there's opportunity. Entrepreneurs get attracted to those areas of the market that have a that have a profit margin, that are inefficient. So naturally, um, profit margins constantly get eroded, and they get eroded by improving processes, lowering costs, finding cheaper ways to do things, innovating, which drives prices lower for consumers over time. This is just like basic stuff. Everybody can agree on that. That's exactly how I would work, how you would work, how every listener here would work. You'd find if you wanted to compete in a business, you find an area that doesn't have a lot of competition right now, has fat profit margins that you could do a bit better, right? And you go and do that, and you'd undercut them, and you deliver a high quality service, and the businesses you were competing in would go out of business, right? And then someone would come after you. Right? This is just the way the world works. This is human action at the smallest possible level, and that expands to all society. So yes, prices should go down forever, quality goes up forever, and we do see this in certain areas of the economy, but often it's masked. So when we look at the price of a computer, price of a computer 1 year to the next doesn't really change very much. But that's not because prices are not falling, it's because quality is going up. So if you bought the same computer from last year, this year, it would be a lot cheaper. You're paying the same price because it's 5 times better. Right? So you have this technology is naturally deflationary, but sometimes the price explicitly falling is hidden because the quality goes up dramatically at the same time. But there's large swathes of our economy which are not subject to free market forces and that are structurally abused by the money. And it's basically anything that touches the government in any way. Healthcare, schooling, private schools, universities, anything where you're interrupting or getting in the way of the free market drives prices high. And often in the name of, the social good or something like this. But it's a total disconnect between um, delivering or saying that you're trying to enable equality and these sorts of things, but introduce structural problems, which then drive the costs up for everybody. And we see this touching everything: energy, schooling, healthcare, you name it, food, whatever. It's interruptions of the free market. And so, if we think about what causes those things, or what is the main driver of those things, it is the corruption of the money. Because the corruption of the money leads to bigger and bigger state involvement in everything, and more destruction of free market everywhere, right? And so it's all downstream of the money. And so what happens on this island is Fiatello starts, he's up for re-election. He doesn't want to raise taxes, and he doesn't want to cut spending because it's going to cost him votes. And so he just presses the big red button and he prints a little bit of extra money for the government. And initially nobody knows, and he gets re-elected, so he's happy. But what he's done is he's debased the currency. So overnight, he's now introduced more fiatellos into the money supply than there was yesterday. But overnight, the amount of goods and services in the economy hasn't changed. And so these new set of fiatellos are sitting in the government's account. And what happens is he's using this extra money to effectively cover the hole in the budget. Right? And we have a massive hole in our budget, the same in most countries. Right? And we find ways to print money and do exactly the same thing: debt issuance, and as well as the intervention of the central banks to actually increase the money supply in a variety of innovative and confusing ways for the public. But what happens is, because he's created this extra money, and because it's in the account of the government, when that comes into the economy, it doesn't go to everybody equally or in proportion to the amount of money they already hold. It goes to the people and companies connected directly or indirectly to the government. So it's the areas the government's already involved with. They start spending that money into the economy. And previously, whereas everything was entirely a free market, so when a price changed, it was because of a change in demand or supply. And so when these fiatellos come into the market, they start to distort the price signals in certain areas connected to the government. And it's then a signal to all the entrepreneurs in the market that there's a demand-supply imbalance. There's an opportunity here for you to deploy your capital as an entrepreneur, your time and energy, to come in and make this area of the economy more efficient, because the profit margins are now high because the prices are going up. And so it pulls in productive people. But it's not because the demand has gone up. It's because there's just more fiatellos washing around in the system. It's a false economy, and it begins to eat at the productivity for everybody. And so it has three major impacts. And this is basically debasing the currency. Yeah. And the first is the distortion of the price signals. The second is that it increases business input costs for every business. So now that prices are starting to go up, every business, regardless of what you do, has at least a human being or some input costs like energy. The basic is energy, but it could be harder raw materials. But those things start to increase in cost because of these extra fiatellos. So now every business is faced with a choice. They can't. Some may be able to absorb that, but only for a certain period of time, because businesses need to make a small profit margin to be able to survive. Right? It's not them being greedy. It's just for it to be economically rational to run a business, there needs to be some reward for running a business. And that's how growth is created, from individuals deploying their capital, deploying their time to create businesses, which then employ people and drive growth and drive productivity. This is just how markets work. You take that away, you end up in communism, and then everyone's either equally poor or equally dead. Like that's what happens. And so the free market has this natural reaction where the profit margin now needs to be increased from the businesses. And so the businesses can do that in one of three ways. They can either just pass on the price increase that they've received themselves into their product, and now the customer just needs to pay more. Or they can shrink the product. And we see this all the time. We see shrinkflation. And companies say, no, you're just getting bigger. The Mars bars have always been the same size. Just, you know, as a kid, it seemed twice as big
The
because your hand
the
was
number of
small.
crisps in the
It's
packet
like,
hasn't
no,
changed.
yeah, exactly. It's still the same size before you open it. Still inflated. But we see this all around ourselves, and you have this shrinkflation. But both of those things reduce the affordability for the population, because the population now have to spend more for the same goods or the same amount to receive less. And they bought the previous amount because they needed the previous amount. So they have to just buy more of it. And so that impacts your affordability. But the third one is that businesses could choose to keep the price the same, the size the same, but then just find a way to lower their input costs. And they can do that through two ways. One is to just fire people. It's the obvious thing. But by firing people, you make it more unaffordable for the population because you're removing some income. But then the more insidious one is just to reduce the quality. And so businesses keep the price the same, size the same, but they just reduce the quality of their inputs. And so it starts to impact the quality of the food. So fresh ingredients are replaced with ever increasing levels of industrialized sludge in our food. And it's a race to the bottom in terms of standards, because the amount of money printing just doesn't stop. It's continuous. So you have this constant pressure as a business to compromise in one of these different ways. And the knock-on effects for reducing the quality of the ingredients is you create health crises. So Fiatello starts to see a rise in obesity across his population, as well as other secondary health impacts. And then what does that mean? Well, the government now has to deal with all these people who are now unemployed and the health crisis. And so the government now needs to deploy more resources back into the economy to try and deal with some of these things. And it does so by further distorting the price signals, by further printing money. And, the third one, so we've covered price distortion of the price signals. We've covered the impact on businesses. But the third one, and this is one that we see most obviously around us, is asset price changes. And given that we're in the UK and the UK is sort of house mad, is that asset prices just go up because he's printed more fiatellos. Anybody who knows he's printed more fiatellos, of course, isn't going to sell their house for the same price as they did yesterday, because I know they know there's more fiatellos in the system. So assets that are of limited supply start to increase in value. So the stock market starts going up. The house prices start going up because people realize they also can't keep their money in the bank because it buys less every year. So what do I do if I'm going to sit on this melting ice cube of cash? I can't rely on that maintaining its purchasing power over time. I'm going to buy a
Assets.
second house. I'm going to buy a bigger house with a bigger mortgage, and at least I don't have to keep the money in the bank. I'm gonna start speculating on increasingly risky assets, because the assets never go down; they just go up. So it's a one way bet. And so what happens then is more and more leverage enters the economies. People borrow more individually or as companies, or they start to speculate more. The amount of savings drops, and you're just introducing more and more risk into the economy. And now the government, Fiatello, is thinking like, this is amazing. Like, I'm this economic genius because I can hit the big red button, print this money, I get re-elected, and asset prices just go up. I've like solved economics. This is easy. But of course, not everyone benefits from that. The people who own assets benefit to some degree, and I'll qualify why it's only to some degree. But people who don't own the assets don't. They
And
don't
Joe, one
participate.
of the key things you
But when the
listed
assets,
as your list of problems at the start of the video is wealth inequality. And that clearly
yeah,
underlines why the quality and the soundness of our money relates to this ever increasing gap that we're seeing between the poorest and the wealthiest within the UK and beyond.
absolutely, absolutely, and it's entirely because of this, right? The free market should be lowering the costs of living for everybody and raising everyone's living standards, whether you are productive or not, right? Your money should be becoming more valuable over time. In fact, it's getting destroyed. It's just getting destroyed at a rate which you are led to believe is a natural effect, which is it's entirely man-made, and it's also being destroyed at a rate which means that we don't have protests in the street. You don't get protests in the street for being robbed at 5% a year. You don't. It's the slow melting of the ice cube. The ice cube is not on fire for us yet. It is in other parts of the world, but for us, it's much slower. But people see this themselves. So if you, amongst your listeners, you will have some people who are on the property ladder or have owned a house for a while, and some people who are looking to get on the property ladder. It is incredibly hard now because house prices, they only go up in the long run. And it's not because they are a productive asset. They're not a productive asset. They cost you money to run. But they've become a store of value. They've been monetized in this country because we can't rely on the money. We can't rely on the money, so we have to figure out how to store the money. And we store it by buying houses or buying second houses and then renting them out. That's it. Which drives the cost up for everybody. And lending standards have gone ever lower over time. And because the house prices have gone up, and because there's a squeeze on the cost of living, because of these issues caused by the big red button, to reduce families' ability to the affordability for the population, it means you're trying to buy something which is accelerating away from you at the same time as the value of your money is declining and the spare cash you have is declining, which means now families can't have one person as the breadwinner, have a family and buy a house. They just
Joe,
can't.
that
You
is
need
why
both
I
parents.
wrote down the deterioration of the family unit, and it's something that I've railed against.
Yeah.
In December, I went to Dubai and did a number of episodes there. Spoke to a gentleman called James Cooper, and we were talking in defense of traditional values. And a lot of people who listened to the full episode were in strong agreement with what we were saying about the nuclear family, how helpful it is for children, the secure environment, the benefits of it. And I come from that background myself, and I'm very fortunate for that my dad could afford to raise as a single income, and my mum was able to look after my brother and I feel like I got a lot from that.
Yeah.
But that's not but that's
Absolutely.
now
It's the way it should
considered
be.
a luxury. And people that saw the clip where maybe it felt like we were criticizing single mothers or we were criticizing how society has gone that way, they had a visceral reaction to it because they were like, oh, it's okay for you. Now, it was okay for me because I was born in 1992, my brother was born in 1995. This would not be the case for the income that my father earned to be able to do what we did if I was born in 2024 or 2025. And that is the reality of what has happened to our currency, albeit it's been happening since 1971, but it's happening much
Yeah.
faster.
100%. And this is not a critique of any particular family setup or any approach from any individual. This is a structural change that has occurred upstream of anybody's particular setup. This is the giant theft which is at the center of the financial system, which is the fact that the government can create whatever money it wants at any point in time because it has a big red button. And it is stolen vast amounts of purchasing power from the population and continues to do so because it's the only choice they have. But then it puts all these families, regardless of their family setup, under the pressure that they have to prioritize trying to earn money just to stand still over creating a stable family backdrop for children and for having families. And it inevitably means they have fewer children. Because if you need two people to buy a house, two people working, it means that the opportunities to have children or the planning or the flexibility around having children is reduced. And the number of children you can have is also reduced because how on earth are you supposed to have children, be able to look after them for a long period of time and pay the mortgage and be able to afford to live? And if you have to then go to work, if you have more children, it's more childcare costs. It becomes an impossible calculation. And so the only natural outcome is you just have fewer children, or you don't have any children. And this is the manifestation of inflation. This is the big red button impacting how we live our lives today, and it does create the breakdown of the family unit. And the next step there is, well, now that we're having fewer children, and the ability to save is undermined in the economy. Now the government, we start to see demographic changes. Right? So the population is getting older and older and older, and we have fewer young people coming through, and those young people coming through have fewer opportunities. They own fewer assets. They have less optimism in their lives because they don't see a clear path to success. Whatever effort they put in is not rewarded. There's a total disconnect between input and output for people's lives, and people feel this themselves. Right?
The mental health crisis, Joe.
And you get the mental health crisis, but before the mental health crisis, you get the pensions collapse, because the government has made, like, we think the finances of the government are in bad shape because they don't talk about the unfunded liabilities. So, we look at the national debt, we look at the amount that we're losing every year. The national debt is there because we've had to pay for something. There are trillions of pounds that we've promised to pay, but we haven't actually had to pay yet. So we haven't had to issue the debt because the promise hasn't come due. But we've got an aging population and massive pension liabilities that people have paid into a system. So they're already in the books, right? They're already in the asset side of the books, but the liability is hidden. And so as people retire, those bills come due. And we're going to have to issue more debt or print more money to cover those liabilities. And so what Fiatello sees, and is exactly the same today, is that you have to start pushing back their pension retirement age.
He's trying to buy more
further,
time. He's trying to buy more time, but
buy more time.
The piper will have to be paid at some point. Simple as that.
Yes, it will. And he pushes it back, but he also lowers the quality of it. See, he undermines the value of what he pays. Because he has a big red button, if I owe you £100 in the future, and I can print as much money as I want, I can always pay that bill. But when you get £100 in the future, it buys what £10 would buy today, because I've printed what I needed. So I've stolen the purchasing power off everybody to keep my promise, but I kept my promise only nominally. It's not real terms. It's not in real terms, and this is why we see for the older generations a severe reduction in living standards, because quality of life, because they're receiving nominal amounts in their pension while the government's printing money like it's going out of fashion. So if you're receiving, I don't know, £100 a week or £200 a week or whatever, nominal state pension you're on, that's just getting constantly eroded. It's like receiving, £90 a week or £80 a week or £50 a week in purchasing power over time. And so this is just so corrosive across everything. But then you have, like you say, it leads to the mental health crisis, because many people are not even in the position to be able to afford to buy a house. Like it's just so far beyond being achievable that they're stuck renting forever. And if you're stuck renting forever, how are you meant to put down roots? Especially if your rent goes up to, a lot every year or two, you're constantly thinking, right, well, we're going to have to move, we're going to have to do something. And therefore, you sort of put off settling down, put off getting married, put off thinking about having a child, and you start to prioritize today. You're thinking more about going on holiday or, going out and spending your money rather than saving it, because there's no point saving it. You can't save it. You can't save the purchasing power. And even if you did, you'd never be able to afford the assets because they're running away from you in price. And so your mindset just totally changes to be much more short term. And when you're much more short term, you're less invested in life. It's And then even further, people who are less well off, who are struggling to feed themselves, home themselves. You just see a constant decline
In their well-being, Joe.
in the in their well-being, and you see destructive behavior.
Well,
It's like if you feel
escapism is
you're
massive
trapped,
in today's society. So if I
escapism.
look at some of the young guys
Yeah,
that will maybe message me off the back of the podcast, and I speak a lot about elective sobriety. I've never had a problem with alcohol, but I choose when and where I will indulge in it, and it's very rare because I don't get an awful lot from it. But if I
yeah,
look at some of the young guys that get in touch and maybe talk about improvements they've made, one of the first things they did is they stopped running away from their problems. They stopped getting out of their head on the weekend. They stopped watching porn, they stopped vaping, they stopped these things that are taking them away from their current reality. They sat within their current reality and they tried their best to improve their current reality with the tools that we still do have available to us, such as training, improving our income, all these things that are relatively within our locus of control. But these are the outliers. If you look at society and you just have to walk down the high street in the UK, more people are overweight than ever before, more people are dependent than ever before, more people are heavily
yeah.
medicated on stuff like SSRIs and all sorts of other potentially toxic supplements. These things are increasing in prevalence, and I find it really valuable, albeit depressing, that we can link it to an underlying cause and driver.
We absolutely can. It's just not obvious, and because the government has the ability to press the big red button whenever they want and print extra money, they don't want you to know. It's like if you had that ability, you wouldn't want the population applying critical thinking to evaluate the downstream impacts of you having that ability. It's like you don't have a big red button. I don't have one. Families don't have one. Businesses don't have one. You have to live within your means. Like if you're spending too much money, it isn't versus your income, it is not sustainable. Something has to change. Something has to change. But government is not. I use government in central banks here interchangeably because there is a difference, but people can go down that rabbit hole when they follow it with some more reading. But essentially, they are one and the same. But it lets them off the hook. It removes all accountability, and it corrodes everything. And so, as you're saying, people end up living these lives where they fill them with distraction of one form or another. And again, that can lead to bad things like addiction and such, or also, all the other things that we've talked about. But you can deal with that by taking some control over your life. And a lot of it's because you don't feel like you have any control. We don't feel like we have any control because we're fighting just to stand still. But when you take control, you can do that unilaterally through your own decision making. You cut out the things that you just talked about. You start exercising, you start feeling better, you start consuming less media, you start improving yourself, you start learning about things, you start applying your mind critically. Right? These are the things that give people purpose, and it gives you that foundation. And what we've given up on in the UK is the pursuit of excellence. And I would say actually it's broader across the Western world. Across the world, full stop, is the pursuit of excellence has gone. Because the fiat money has corrupted everything.
What?
If you,
No, on you go, Joe.
sorry, go on, Colin. If you are able to give people a set of solid foundations, they will have purpose. They can create purpose and drive and deliver excellence. And then we should be celebrating excellence, which is absolutely not what we do. We don't do it at all. We tear people down rather than celebrate excellence and increase our aspirations for everybody. And this is what's wrong with the UK. We've given up on excellence. And it's just terminal decline. Right? But that would be pretty hopeless situation if there wasn't a solution, right? And the solution is Bitcoin, because the big red button is at the heart of absolutely everything, it corrodes every aspect of society, and which ultimately corrodes every aspect of the way that we think about the world and the way we carry ourselves in decision making. It doesn't have to be that way. If you reset the money, everything else follows. So there is a phrase which is used in Bitcoin, which is going to seem hyperbolic probably to some of your listeners, but if you fix the money, you fix the world.
One of the things that I found fascinating about the way you illustrated things in your story in the video, Joe, is both the societies, Fiatello and Satoshi, start off with the exact same currency, with the exact same principles. And we've spoken there about how this big red button, or as people came to learn about in 2020 for the first time, I would say it came into the general public consciousness, of quantitative easing or money printing. That was the one big fundamental that was changed. Can we recap what some of the qualities of sound, good money would look like? Because what I find exciting is that they had the exact same, apart from one really big fundamental change. And while we want to get back to that, or we want to create that now, we know what's possible.
Yeah. So the biggest change in the video was the printing of extra money, which basically introduced inflation. But there was also a second aspect, which was the last thing I'll talk about in the list here, which is again very important for us today. But both sides of the island start off with perfect money. They can create whatever they want. So instead of just creating good money, they create perfect money. And so the first thing, it has to be scarce. If you are going to store your economic energy in something, you go out and do a day's work. You get paid for a day's work. That is you expending your energy in exchange for economic energy. So your money is like a battery, is an economic battery. That battery should not be decaying because you've already done the work. You should be able to rely on that work, rely on that economic energy to then spend at any point in time as and when you choose to. Right, so the very first thing is scarcity. And the perfect money would be absolutely scarce. You would have a fixed supply forever, maybe not all available at any given point in time, but the creation of new money up until the total supply is only unlocked by doing energy, by expending energy. So it's hard to produce. You've got to do proof of work to generate the money. That's the first one. And some of these are obvious, and there's one or two which are much less obvious. The second one needs to be portable. Money is not helpful if it's really hard to carry or move or exchange. It needs to be effortless to store and move with negligible costs. It needs to be divisible, and is sufficiently divisible to make sure that every different potential economic model is enabled. And one of the issues that we see today is that micropayments are very hard with our fiat currency. So even just paying in a shop on a debit card for less than a couple of pounds, you can't do most independents because the costs of doing it are too high. And also, it may seem strange to want to do a transaction for less than a penny. But if you think about all of the economic business models that can be unlocked by the internet, the streaming of value could be occurring naturally, right? Fractions of a penny, constantly everywhere. But that's just unachievable.
There's no reason why. In the past we had penny sweets, literally, in 1950s when my parents were growing up. So if we had sound money, we would in theory still have penny sweets and other things that were available that were the same or a different type of good that was worth less than a penny. So you should in theory be able to pay for things with tiny fractions of something.
Absolutely. But our fiat model makes those things inaccessible now. So the perfect money would be effectively infinitely divisible. it needs to be durable. And so the money can't go off. It needs to be infinitely durable, last forever. And so for us, in our society today, we have two forms of money. One is physical cash and one is digital cash. Digital cash obviously doesn't expire. It doesn't rot or anything, but the physical cash has a physical element to it, and notes decay, the designs change. You can't save these things outside the banking system because the notes won't be accepted in the shops after 20 years because they've got the wrong person's head on them. Right. So things change. They need to be, and this is one people tend not to think about. Money needs to be fungible. So that means £1 is exactly the same as another pound. You don't have a preference over which pound you have. It's all the same. They have the same characteristics. And it sounds obvious, right? But people at home may have heard of central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, which are increasingly getting pushed by the government. And these are the things that will remove that. So people should think about CBDCs as being programmable money. Your money can be set with expiry dates. Government could issue a rebate to everybody and you've got to spend it in 30 days. Otherwise you lose it. Or you have pounds that are only allowed to be spent
Particular
on
items, yeah.
particular items, or not allowed to be spent on particular. You cannot buy flights, or you
You've had
cannot buy
enough of your
meat,
red meat
or you
allowance for the
cannot
week,
buy.
Joe. You cannot buy this. I would say it's in my top 5 biggest dystopian nightmares.
Yeah, it's coming. It's coming unless people take action. It is coming, and the way you take action is to opt out, and you opt out. You opt out through Bitcoin. It's the only way. It's the only way. So that's the fungibility. It needs to be acceptable, so everybody can both send and receive, and nobody can stop any transaction because you don't have to go through a third party. If I'm paying you, Colin, I can pay you directly, which is what most people tend to think of what's happening when I send you money, I'll send it directly. I'm not. I'm sending it through probably 10 other
Intermediaries, yeah, that's right.
institutions. Yeah, who all maintain their own tables in their own databases, and then they credit one and they debit another, and it goes through the list, goes through the line until we can connect you and me and our financial institutions. And so I can only pay you if all of those institutions agree to update their tables, that's the dystopian thing, right? We've reached this position where the free exchange of value between individuals, or an individual with a business or a business with a business, requires the permission of everybody else, which is totally bonkers. And so perfect money would be entirely both acceptable, but importantly, censorship resistant. So nobody should be able to stop me sending value to you. The bank shouldn't need to care about where I got the money from or what you intend to do with it. It's none of their business. Absolutely none of their business.
Just on that, to bring that
And
to life,
so,
anyone that has invested in crypto will know that sometimes their bank will make it difficult. I'm with Bank of Scotland and it's been okay, but I've had friends that have tried to upload onto Swissborg Exchange and they've been blocked, or they've had to go through phone calls in order to do it. And it's remarkable that you have your money sitting there in an account, but you have to sometimes tell somebody on the other end of the phone who has no right
yeah,
what you're going to use that money for. And there's elements of it, oh, we're trying to prevent you from being scammed or defrauded. And I understand the benevolent aspect of it because the person is just doing their job. They're not some evil actor, but the institutions which are enforcing
yeah,
that are doing that from a self-protection mechanism.
yeah, driven from the government. Because what's effectively happening here is, and the same thing appears in the story, in the video, is that once there's an escape hatch, people use it. If the system wasn't broken, they wouldn't need to escape it. And the escape hatch is getting out of fiat currency into something that can't be debased. Bitcoin cannot be debased. And perhaps we should also touch on why Bitcoin, not crypto. But let's perhaps come back to that in a minute, Colin, because I think it's an important distinction. But once people realise what is happening, they don't want to hold the fiat currency anymore. They don't want to hold the fiatellos. They just want satoshis. Within one Bitcoin, there's 100 million satoshis. It's like pennies to a pound. They just want the satoshis because they can't be debased. It's the world's most efficient economic battery. And so you have to start closing the exits, which is exactly what the banks are doing at the behest of the government. So in the name of protecting everybody, you have to then tell the bank what transactions you want to make and why, even though it's meant to be your money. And we could talk for probably another hour, Colin, around the money in the bank is not money, and it's not in the bank, and it's not yours. So I think the headline to take away is, if you require permission, it is not yours. This is the headline people have in their mind. If you require permission for anything, it is not yours. And that applies to everything in the fiat system. The only thing that you don't require permission for is Bitcoin. You can carry it in your head. You can send it to anybody, receive it from anybody, anywhere in the world. It is the world's first global free market, and it's going to eat the entire world.
When you first discovered Bitcoin, Joe, how has your view and mindset on it evolved?
Oh, just massively. It changes everything. Bitcoin changes everything, because you start to see the world in just a totally different way. Like, I feel more optimistic now than I've ever felt.
Which is in sharp contrast to everyone
else.
else.
In the face. Yeah. But it's because of Bitcoin. Because there's a solution. For me now, Bitcoin is inevitable. Bitcoin is inevitably going to eat the entire world. And that may seem like such a strange statement to make, but I want to try and frame this in a way that makes it more accessible to people. So I think about the world now versus, and you touched on this earlier, the world in the 90s. Right? The world is radically different, but it's radically different because of the internet, primarily, and all the things that the internet unlocked. And we're still building on that, right? This is still just so early in that process. But think about how people thought about the internet in the 90s. People say, it's never going to last.
I might need to get one of those website things.
Yeah. People wouldn't really know even how to get online, how to use a browser, how to connect the fact that there might be some value to be unlocked at some point in the future because of the internet. And that seems so crazy today. But back then, that was just common sense. You'd have people on TV, or, on breakfast TV, talking about this internet thing and how, it's a craze, it's going to go away. Think about Bitcoin exactly the same way. Bitcoin is a civilizational level change for us, in the same way that the internet was, but it's going to make the internet pale in comparison. Because the internet affects our online lives. It also affects our offline lives because of consequences. But compare that to money. Money touches absolutely everything. Online, offline, the way you structure your life, the way that you think, the way that you plan. And Bitcoin's going to consume everything. Because once people start to learn about Bitcoin, and they start to learn about Bitcoin once they understand the problem. When you see the problem, you need a solution. And the only solution is Bitcoin, when you've thought through. And we can touch a little bit of why that's the case. But then once you start learning about Bitcoin, your whole mind starts to change. Because for the first time, you can see that your input matches the output, or your output is driven from your input. I expend my economic energy into a battery that lasts forever. And not only does the battery last forever in purchasing power, the battery gets bigger over time. because the whole world's working 24/7 to increase my purchasing power, because it unlocks the global free market. And so over time, my purchasing power increases, not decreases. And now I start to think about, okay, well, I'm going to plan more for the future because I can rely on the value being there. I know if I do something, I get to keep it and it grows. And the more people that take this selfish approach, the better it is for everybody. And that's just, you cannot defeat a system like that. You cannot defeat a system where everybody working in their own self-interest benefits everybody else. There's no way
The
to beat
rising
that
tide can raise all ships.
because it's the logical outcome for everybody.
The rising tide
Sorry?
can raise all ships.
Yeah, everyone benefits. Everyone benefits from acting rationally in their own self-interest. There is no way to beat that. And so the inevitable outcome is that everybody gets there. It takes time, like the internet. You know, we have most people in most countries, bar a few, on the internet now. Right? Still not reached 100% of people, but that took what, 30 years? 25 years? Bitcoin is, you think about Bitcoin as being like early 90s internet or late mid 90s internet. We have like 1% of the world, probably, because it's still hard to use. It's like getting online in the
There's a lot of
90s. Like you had
friction.
to,
That's right.
like
And
most people,
even
a
in
lot of
the UK,
friction.
for me to buy it,
A lot of
it's frictionful. And I guess I will have some defenses. Like I do think like it is helpful to fill out a KYC because you need, especially when people are spending money, albeit money that's going down in value rapidly. I do think you should make them think, but to create more friction in terms of like a 24-hour cooling off period and these things like that, that is too much friction. But I do think like some sort of form to like show that you're informed about what you're buying. I can understand why they do that.
I think you can attempt to rationalize why they should do that. I think the key difference here is understanding why that should not be the case for Bitcoin. Right? People use Bitcoin and crypto sort of interchangeably, especially within the media. And a lot of your audience probably wouldn't be able to articulate the difference. But it's such a massive difference, they're not even the same thing. They're not even the same. But this is because of a lack of education and misrepresentation, not deliberately necessarily by the media. It's just a lack of understanding. In that, and I say this a lot. So apologies if people have already heard this, but the mental model is typically you have fiat world on one side, and you have cryptocurrencies on the other. And within cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin plays a small part. That's what people typically have in their mind, like normal world, crypto world, of which Bitcoin is a part. But it's totally wrong. So if anybody has that in their head, like bin it. The right model is fiat world on one side, so normal world on one side, of which cryptocurrencies is a part. And on the other side, Bitcoin. Bitcoin is so radically different from everything else. It is just the other world. Cryptocurrencies are fiat. They are just a part of the normal world. Because what makes Bitcoin different is that it is a decentralized, neutral money for the world, backed by energy. Okay? Whereas cryptocurrencies, and this could be the whole list of ones you've heard of, right? And meme coins and all of this, they're at absolute best, centralized technology looking for product market fit or fraud. And it's somewhere on that scale. So at best, you think you have a legitimate use case and you're trying to find that use case and convince people it has value. And at the other end, you're just trying to steal money from people. Now, every crypto you could name is on that scale, with the exception of Bitcoin. Okay, Bitcoin is decentralized as proof of work. It doesn't have a CEO. It doesn't have people who have pre-mined a token. It doesn't require
It doesn't have a marketing
convincing people it
campaign,
has
which I think is
value.
the most interesting thing about it.
It doesn't have a
You all talk
marketing
about
campaign.
it for free.
Bitcoin is the most.
It's mad. Like, look at all the podcasts that you've been on that are Bitcoin podcasts that are not incentivized to do it other than talking about it for the sake of talking about it.
Exactly. Bitcoin doesn't have a marketing department, and yet it's arguably one of the most well-known brands in the world. But people don't understand what it does. So it's ticked the awareness box, but it hasn't ticked the understanding box. But once you have a skeletal mental framework to think about where Bitcoin fits into the world, suddenly you start to realize the value in it. It's the value is the separation of money and state, and that's where we're going. Governments will not have access to a big red button eventually. Bitcoin is going to consume the entire world. It's going to demonetize everything, and it's going to suck in all the capital over time. And eventually, governments are going to have to print their own currency to
What
buy.
does the separation of money and state look like? Well, and how quickly do we see that unfold?
It seems like such a radical concept because all we've ever known, everybody alive today, with the exception of a few very old people, is a world where we have a fiat currency, so the government can just create money whenever it wants. And so thinking about the future is like a massive question mark for people. But I would encourage people not to think about it as necessarily this on-off switch, because nobody with the power to create money is ever going to willingly give that up, because no one's ever incentivized to give that up. It's always just too easy for the politicians just to hit the big red button and win the next election and leave it to the next guy in 4 years' time to deal with the consequences. But it won't be driven from the government, so it'll be driven by the individuals. Every single person can unilaterally begin to separate money and state. If you learn about Bitcoin, you're going to understand more and more around why this is needed. Watch the video, understand the problem, then start to learn about Bitcoin. Once you have reached a position that you understand why you need it, there's nothing stopping you from engaging with it. And once you engage with it, you engage more with it, and eventually, and it takes time for conviction to build. As I say, like, it's been 5 years for me, and I certainly didn't feel like this 5 years ago, or 3 years ago, or even probably 2 years ago. It takes time and effort. But what happens is eventually you just defund the entire system, because everyone can unilaterally move. And it doesn't take a large proportion of the population to start moving away until it starts to force a change in thinking at the governmental level. Because I am now a one-issue voter. The only thing I care about is Bitcoin from a political perspective. And you see the consequences of this, for example, in the US. You had the Democrats trying to find every way to try and kill, I'll say crypto, but crypto is, misapplied.
Gary Gensler at the
But
SEC,
Bitcoin within, you can't fight it. It's like the prisoner's dilemma. Like, there's an optimal strategy here. If you fight Bitcoin, you will lose. There's very little to be gained from fighting against Bitcoin, because the amount of people who are ardently anti-Bitcoin is very, very small. Whereas the number of people who are ardently for Bitcoin is much larger and
What's been
growing
your
rapidly.
biggest pushback on
So,
your video, Joe?
biggest pushback on the video tends to be that people who have a very formal background in economics don't realize the world is naturally deflationary.
The technology piece that we spoke about.
They see, yeah, and they see the hand of government and the actions of the big red button as being necessary for growth in an economy, which is just so unbelievably backward. And the rationale is, Well, if prices fall, then everything collapses because the debts become unsustainable. Okay, well, yeah, that would be the case if you were massively leveraged, which the world is. Okay. But what is inevitably going to happen is that central banks just print more money and inflate away all these debts. So the fiat currency is going to zero in purchasing power. We all know this. In a year's time, your money's worth less. 10 years' time is worth a lot less. 100 years' time is not worth anything. Like, we all know that's not a controversial statement.
We can see it
We all know this
unfolding, and
already.
yeah,
We can see it unfolding. We can see it unfolding. And so, their argument is based in the present. So if you have debts, you have to have the economy forever growing. It's a debt-based economy. You've just got to inject more debt to stop it falling over. You can't allow asset prices to fall. So you've got to
you
undermine the
prop it
free
up.
market to prop it up. And so if you allowed deflation, if you allowed the natural sequence of events to play out, everything would collapse. And so their central thesis is, in order to have a successful economy, we need to steal from everybody. We've got to steal a percentage of your purchasing power every year to keep the show on the road. And that, if you base that is the basis for all economics currently, which is just so ludicrous. I mean, it's obviously ludicrous. I mean, in 2 minutes here, we sort of dismantled that. It's so you cannot build a successful long-term economy on those foundations, because inevitably it just means you need to steal forever and ultimately steal everything, because you undermine the productivity, you undermine the price signals, you steal the productivity, you create issues throughout society, and eventually it just
That's right.
collapses. This is the road. This is the road we're on, and so that is the main criticism for normal people watching it who haven't had that indoctrinated Keynesian economics background. It's entirely logical. Like, yeah,
And I
100%.
think that's the journey. That's the journey you
This
take people on.
explains this
That's the
explains
journey
the world.
you take people on. And
Yeah,
cards on the table. I spoke to you before we hit record that I viewed crypto as a percentage of my asset allocation. I invested across a number of different coins. I was always buying Bitcoin because it was the daddy. It was the one that made sense to me, and I could see over I don't know when I bought 2020, so I could see over like an 8, 9, 10 year period it had gone up significantly. And although it obviously has its, and again this is a feature, not a bug. The way it would go up and down, but I can see the time horizons. It looks
yeah,
great. But my mindset has changed in recent months where I would no longer take profit off the top of it. I'm just hodl, and I'm comfortable doing that. Whereas the other more speculative assets, which you're not a fan of, and I appreciate that, I'm happy to sell out of those and use that capital for my living expenses or my lifestyle that I need at that point in time. And I think that's one of the interesting points about investing and the technology. There are ones that you want to hold forever because that's the direction of travel. But I can understand why people invest
yeah,
in those others to maybe pay themselves at different points in time. Because as long as we still have fiat as our main main spending power, and I appreciate that's going to change, you can see why people have exposure to it.
yeah. And again, I think with a lot of questions when it comes to Bitcoin, the frame of reference, like your starting point, is has to be considered, because the starting point of this question is Bitcoin and those things are similar. They're not. They're not. It's like comparing, and Bitcoin is not just like gold. But even if you thought like gold, comparing gold to speculative venture
Mm.
capital private companies in some random country, like, you can put your money in both of those things, right, but they're not the same. Not the same. You could, in the same way, you could put money in housing, or you could buy a lottery ticket, or you can put on a football accumulator at 1,000 to 1 and hope that comes in. Like, you can put your money in a lot of places, and some will work out and some won't. But if you are putting money long term into cryptocurrencies, it's all going to zero. It's all going to zero when measured in Bitcoin. They may retain some value in fiat terms over time, but they're all going to
It's
zero
the
when
time
measured in
horizons.
Bitcoin.
so that again, that's where my understanding of things has shifted through your content and through kind of the rabbit hole that I've gone down off the back of your content, which is again is the whole
Okay, good,
is
good,
the whole
good.
point as well. And I guess what I was definitely pointing to there is I can understand in the short term the approach to investing across different speculative assets. But if you've got a 5, 10, 15 and longer time horizon, then you can see why people are going to be more heavily into Bitcoin while maybe speculating in other assets or other means in the short term to maybe fund percentage increases that they're chasing.
Yeah, different people are at different
Mm.
points in their life and take different routes and are prepared to take different
Mm.
risks. All these assets are just trade-offs in risk versus potential return. If you're speculating on meme coins or crypto assets, it is like just lottery tickets. There's nothing under these things. There's no use case. Bitcoin is perfect money for the world, and yeah, just try and
Keep going. Yeah.
separate the two as much as possible. Like I think ultimately the end goal, even from investing in some of these other cryptocurrencies, just to ultimately end up holding more Bitcoin. That's
Well, that's
that's the
true.
long
Yeah,
term target.
there's
That's
a
long term
gentleman,
target. Yeah.
Joseph Rackett. He was one of the kind of OG online fitness coaches, and I spoke to him in May when I went to Dubai for another podcast tour, and he was laughing that he'd made a load of money in some meme coin called Pepe, I think it was called, and he just laughed at the end. He was like, "Yeah, I just bought more Bitcoin," and he was one of the first people that I spoke to that said to me he buys every week and he doesn't care what price it is. So if it's 100k, he
Yeah.
says good. If it's 90k, he says good. If it's 70k, he says good. If it goes to 125k in this cycle, he says good. If it goes down to 16k, he's even happier because he just accumulates
Yeah.
more. And that was one of the first people who I saw using speculative assets to accumulate more of the thing that he really wants longer term, regardless of price point. And that's something that I took a while to get my head around because I was buying when it was dipping all the time during 21 or towards the end of 21, all through 2022. And I was happy to be accumulating because I knew it would come back round just based on the math. And that was encouraging.
Yeah.
But that took a long time for me to get over because, and it takes me a lot for the moment, for example, when I see it sitting at the time of recording, again, it could definitely change, but it's sitting around about 100k dollars. It seems harder to buy it at that price when I was buying lots of it at 20k.
Yeah. A lot of this is human. It's just
Mm.
human psychology. I mean, Bitcoin has a fixed supply forever, and in the same way that I talked about it being inevitable. If you consider something to be inevitable, and the rationale for it becoming inevitable is it's the logical outcome, and that everyone will ultimately get there, then you have something which is the only absolutely scarce thing in the universe that everyone is going to own. Every person, every company, every country is going to own this. So I fully subscribe to your friend's mindset. I'm happy when the price goes down, which is sounds crazy to say, but when the price drops 10%, I'm happy. If it goes up 10%, I'm not happy because I'm going to be buying it forever. And I know there is an army of people growing daily exactly like me because it's a fixed supply forever. And I know where it's going to end up. And by the way, I should say, these are entirely my views,
Of
not
course.
financial advice, etc., etc. But do your own research. Learn about this. Um, and this is not a short term. This is not a short term game. And to get to the point where you can think about it and be very comfortable in this view. It
It's
takes
definitely an
time.
evolution. And I think the start point for a lot
Yeah,
of people that I would strongly recommend is, of course, going across to watch What is the Problem on YouTube. And it really has
yeah,
made me consider, as somebody that's been in the digital investment crypto space for a while to consider things differently off the back of what you've created, and the fantastic conversation I've got to have just now, which is definitely the aim of what you've been doing, Joe. Apart from, of course, the YouTube video, which I'll link in the show notes, where else should people head to continue the conversation with you?
So if you want to learn more about Bitcoin, go to there's a website that we've set up, which you'll be able to find through the YouTube links as well. But it's satsversusfiat.com. So SATS and then FIAT.com. And the video lives there, but also there is a number of follow-on videos. And so what's the problem gets you to the starting line to then want to learn about Bitcoin? Go to that website. There are then 5 other videos covering different aspects of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is not just the technology, or it's not just digital gold. It's not just this, or it's not just that. It is an incredibly varied set of rabbit holes which touches almost every aspect of our lives. And so there's 5 different videos there covering different things. So you will find something there that piques your interest, and then watch that, and then hopefully watch something else or learn about it. Just start that journey. So that's the first thing. If you're on X, I'm on X as well at SatmoJoe. So SATMOJOE. Just connect with me on there. And X is a wonderful place for getting to know more about Bitcoin. It's sort of where a lot of Bitcoiners are. And just watch videos, read books, send me an email. I'm happy to talk to people. This is a long journey, but ultimately everyone's going to get there. And it's just on you as the individual to put in a small amount of work to get started. And it will be the highest return on investment that you ever have in your entire life is spending an hour learning about Bitcoin. Because once you start, the end is inevitable, right? And it changes everything about you. Everything about you. Decision making, optimism for the future. And yeah, I would encourage people just to start with the video and see
Beautiful
where you
stuff,
go.
Joe. Thank you for your energy, your passion, your insights. I've had a lot of fun in this conversation. I'm sure the listeners have as well. And I want to say thank you to them. Thank you to you. I'll be back to speak to you guys again very, very